In this video here, you guys invited me to do this video. I'm going to tell you now, you're going to hear things you've never heard before. I have done a deep dive on Australia in the past, and then I left it alone, put those notes up, and came back to it when I found some corresponding material in New Caledonia. Then I found things about New Zealand. Then I found things about Dwarka, the ancient traditions of Lemuria and Mu, and all these different kingdoms that existed in the water. There's water there now, but there wasn't water in the Indian Ocean at all times. We have traditional records of land masses that were out there. So if you're ready, hey, we can dive in, because Australia is something I've always been very interested in, because it's just a red wasteland in parts of it, and I know where that red dirt came from. It's one of the things I study a lot. But
let's do it.
I know that archaeologists at the Australian National University, they had excavated ruins that match the design and expanse. And in expanse, very similar ruins that have been found in Sumer, Babylon, Egypt, and Israel. This is in Australia. It was discovered by the Australian National University. And because I was so shocked to find out, because I did not know that there had been some type of infrastructure in ancient Australia, I have my tablet here. I have a picture of the excavation. You guys might not be able to see it very good. Can you see that?
Yeah.
They're digging down, finding chambers, corridors, galleries of rock. This is in Australia.
Yeah.
And this isn't some wackadoodle. This isn't some wackadoodle guy out there, with a tinfoil hat and all that. This is the Australian National University scientists conducting these excavations. So it's amazing the things that are kept from the public. You just have to do deep dives to find these things out.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome. We're back, Tartaria Australia, Kelly and I, and we have with us Jason Brishears. Most of you will know Jason. If you don't, all the links will be below. Go across and check out his work, and you will, be amazed. He's got a huge body of work, and of course, we are Tartaria Australia. So today we're going to dive into Jason's brain and see what we can pull out on Australia and Australia's past, as that's what we look into here. So welcome, Kelly.
Woohoo.
How are you?
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Jason. Welcome to our channel. Jason. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. It's
awesome.
I'm really intrigued by how you guys do this movie background you have in the back. That's it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, the clouds we had. I
have I'm a bit obsessed with the whole art side of all of our deep diving. So when it comes to backgrounds and videos and t-shirts, I'm like totally in.
Right. I didn't see the last video yet. I was reading the comments on Tartarian cities in the sky.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was I don't know if y'all focused only on like the Australian area or all that, but there has been 3 or 4 incidents in the historical record where whole populations swore up and down, like in 1890, they just swore up and down that a city structure was just stuck there in the sky floating. And one was in North America in 1890. Another one was in 1561 with a bunch of other astronomical, really weird stuff. You guys know I'm a student of Charles Fort. Yeah, if Fort wrote it, I'm gonna know it. I'm going to know it.
Well, I love that, Jason. I mean, before we take in this massive deep dive, and footnote audience, we've been warned that Jason is going to speak his little brain out. And we're going to have to really like get in there when we've got a question. So I'm going to just, before we even deep dive into Australia, which is just so exciting to see the content you have there. What are your thoughts about the floating city? Like where we've gone with our theory is that Tartaria potentially was a civilization of the air. And we've linked that notion to the buildings having these sort of tall towers, the whole consciousness around the steampunk movement, the lack of sewage and toilets and kitchens and bathrooms, and basically everything you need to be human in these buildings are missing. And this like ability to, you know, use the magnetic levitation force. So we've really like started to look at this possibility that Tartaria could have been a floating civilization. So thoughts on that, Jace?
Well, I could actually contribute to that. I didn't know. I have a lot. I actually have a lot of notes on something like that. I wasn't prepared for that for right now, but I will say this off the top of my head. David Hatcher Childress, and we're going to discuss him today because I want to cite his book on my tablet. I'm going to show you what that book looks like. So I know some of your readers are going to want, some of your listeners are going to want to order this book. David Hatcher Childress has traveled the entire world, and he wrote a single book called Lost Cities of Ancient Lemuria in the Pacific. It's a book of archaeology and history. It is packed full of data, diagrams, archaeological discoveries, relics, artifacts. It's just fantastic. In that book, he even theorizes when he wrote it in the early 80s that the only explanation for the Maritime that have been found all spread throughout the tiniest islands of Melanesia, Polynesia, and Micronesia, all the way to Easter Island, South America, connecting Australia to, and connected to mainland China. The only explanation for these flat top tiny pyramids that are almost as large as the islands themselves is that something was skipping from island to island from the sky. And every once in a while, that vehicle had to touch down and either recharge or rest or whatever, or maybe it can only travel in the daytime. But he links it to the ancient Eastern Vimana aircraft of the like the Vimanas, the ancient Vedic text that talks about how to build Vimanas and how to aerial combat maneuvers and pre-flight checks. These are all in Vedic scripture. Most people don't know these texts have been found. We're talking about 4,000-year-old Sanskrit texts that teach you how to build aerial structures and then do like 20 to 30 pre-flight checks. And if you get in a battle in the sky, these Vedic texts even teach you how to dogfight flying your Vimana. So I can add to that yes, there probably was a flight. The structures were probably lighter than air based. Like Zeppelins were probably not new. Of course. It's only a rediscovered technology that was quickly suppressed. But yeah, it's there. I can follow the reasoning. I'm very open to that because of what has been found. Not because I'm imaginative and I would love the idea, but we do have archaeological anomalies that are inexplicable without there being a very large presence of aerial aircraft. And we have the Nazca geoglyphs. We have, even in Australia, I don't know if you guys know this, but Australia has the largest aggregate glyph in the world.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about that. I even have pictures of that. Great. But agroglyphs come from a certain time period. Everybody was doing them at the same time. But I'm going to cover that in this video about that. It's interesting that you even mentioned that because we haven't even prepared anything for this video. We were just going to do an Australia freestyle. Yeah. But that's very interesting you mentioned that because I'm going to cover some of that data. I have the slides on my tablet.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, I mean, coming live from the Australian Tartaria site, man, we are right into the notion of floating flying cities at the moment. We've deep dived on the concept of there being missing suns. And Campbell mentioned to me that you actually had connected the pyramid, the use of the pyramid. And I asked him, well, I wonder if that has something to do with the missing sun and drawing energy during a reset via a sun through those pyramids. So I just love, let's just deep dive. So Jason's going to start talking to us about his context about Australia. So let's go, Tartaria Australia. Take it away, Jason. Start wherever you want to start.
Oh, let me look.
And we'll follow behind you with our imagination.
All right. I'm going to look at these slides real quick because a picture is truly 1,000 words. Believe
yeah.
that.
If you want to share screen, just go for it.
You know what? I'm not set up for that.
No,
I have
cool.
the
Okay, no
I
worries.
have all these on a tablet, and then I'll share them. I'll blow them up and share them. I may have to turn the light off so you can see it good though.
No worries.
But let's see something real quick. Let's do an experiment. I'll just do an experiment real quick.
I think that's worse.
No.
Wow. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all.
No, it's just.
Oh,
Oh, there you go.
Oh,
It
no,
works
that's
there.
good. Yeah,
That's-
now it is. Yeah.
Yep. All right, we've
Okay.
got that.
All right, cool. I'll just keep that light off. Y'all can still see me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Picture's worth 1,000 words. This is why I have these slides. I do that for a lot of my presentations. I don't need actual cliff notes. I need images because the images pull back all the research. They pull back everything I've studied because I need to see pictures, and I'll keep pictures on my screen when I'm doing my own videos on my own channel, and they'll just trigger me. I'll be able to go through the data, but I got to see those pictures. And you know, I'm confident that most of your listeners, they already know the controversy of the Egyptian petroglyphs found in Australia. Many of you guys, many of them can tell everybody else exactly where they are. But dismissing petroglyphs as Egyptian in origin is not as conclusive as establishment critics convey. Let me explain. So here's a pic of some of these Egyptian deals. You guys seen these many times, but some of your listeners might not have.
Yeah, in
Some
Gosford.
of your listeners might not have seen these.
Yep.
Yep.
These are actual picture of Australia. These are Egyptian hieroglyphs in Australia, and many people have checked these out, even academics. But I mean, they're very popular. They're not hard to find. But there's a big difference between Egyptian Demotic and hieratic scripts. Vast differences in style and connotations between like the pyramid text and let's see, the coffin text. When people say Egyptian hieroglyph, only one idea appears in their minds, but you're talking about a civilization that had hieroglyphs for about 3,000 years, and every 2 or 3 centuries they were totally different and often changed their meanings and their syntax. So these are the things you have to be considered when you find Egyptian relics in other countries, because the nuances attached to those definitely tell you when those Egyptians were in that country. You follow me?
Yeah.
So this is the type of study that Barry Fell did. Barry Fell wrote a book called America BC, where he studied Egyptian hieroglyphics in Central, South, and North America and realized that a lot of them weren't even by Egyptians, they were by Libyan navigators who were using the Egyptian script, because the Egyptians often use the Libyans as labor in their ships. So it's just a point of interest. But there were also differences in expression between the scribes who were adepts and the mariners who left their sigils on the stone all over the ancient world. Not everybody was a scholar. So when we have these critics say, well, that's not Egyptian glyphic, because all these sigils right here are at 45 degrees to the crane's nose, and then directly under the crane's nose, there's a frog foot. And because they want to isolate particulars and make them absolutely exact, this is how academia dismisses stuff all the time when the actual glyphs are legitimate. They were done by somebody with a equivalent of a 6th grade education. He's been a shipman, he's been a Wainwright all his life, but he knew how to write. He just wasn't as good as somebody in the nobility. So we find this all over the world. We find these glyphs and all, and they're dismissed by academia almost every single time because they aren't found in Egypt, which is ridiculous. I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar that in 1912, it was in 1912, an Australian farmer found an ancient bronze coin while digging for a fence. It was examined, and experts claimed that it was Egyptian from about 220 BC. Now, I've seen this in a few magazines, like Atlantis Rising. I've seen this but you're not going to find anything like this in National Geographic or anything like that. But what we did find in National Geographic was King Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, excavated under the direction of Howard Carter. You all guys know, and you've all heard about King Tut and everything he found. What they didn't expect to find was very Aboriginal style boomerangs that were inside the crypt. So we even have stories of a marsupial skeleton that was found in an ancient Egyptian tomb. Now, the scholars dismissed that as well, and they did it very cleverly, because the original news reports about that marsupial skeleton said it was a kangaroo, but it wasn't. It was some other type of marsupial field rat or rodent, and the scholars were able to dismiss that from the public by telling the truth that it wasn't a kangaroo. But the real truth is that it truly was a marsupial, and it was only native to the southern hemisphere. So we have a lot of examples of academia just totally dismissing stuff, and they'll take it whatever chance they can get. Yeah. But as Australia, it's the only continent that's also a country. So it's not surprising to find that it also boasts of the largest agroglyph in the entire world. I don't know how you guys pronounce it, but it's Mariman or Merryman.
Yeah.
It's M-A-R-R-E-E.
Mary.
Is it Marie Man or something?
Merryman,
yeah. It's crazy, but it looks just like a man who's about to use a boomerang. It looks just like it's the largest agroglyph in the entire world.
Yep, that one, yep.
That's it right there. That's in Australia. Now you have to understand, we have for hundreds of square miles in South America, starting at Nazca and stretching all the way to Pumapunka, Tiahuanaco, Lake Titicaca, we have these agroglyphs, but none of them are this size. There are spiders and dragonflies, man-shaped alien-looking things, all kinds of flora and fauna, all these really, really beautiful things. But there was a period of time in the ancient world that I'll get to here in a little while where these were very popular in civilizations everywhere. Even in the UK, they were doing them in chalk hills, like the Cerne Abbas giant is only one of them. There's also the snake eating the seed in North America. It's a huge agroglyph of a snake that's made 3D. The hills themselves are mounds that look serpentine, and the snake's mouth is open wide, about to eat a seed or an egg. So they've been found ubiquitously. I'm pretty sure that Europe and Asia can boast of some too. I just don't know offhand about them. But this is the sky-facing agroglyphs that are famous, like the Cerne giant and the Nazca lines. These were done for a very definitive reason. Academia dismisses some of them as a hoax. The one in Australia was dismissed as a hoax. You can look at time release pictures of the one in Australia, and you can see where it was originally found, and then months later, the left arm, half of it's missing. And then you can look at pictures from about a year later, and the whole missing. It looks like a very deliberate scrub. Then after about a year, most of it was missing. So there's something happened in Australia about that, but we still have all the photographic evidence from the people that were in aircraft that took those pictures.
So what kind of time frame are those glyphs from?
Okay. In my Chronicon, I go through all this chronology and stuff. It was because of a very devastating Phoenix phenomenon cataclysm in 2647 BC. In 2647 BC, the ruling elite dynasties vanished. No one knows where they went or what happened to them, but the story and traditions are found ubiquitously. They're all throughout the ancient Americas and in Asia. They just left. All of them disappeared. Humans were left to fend for themselves. The gods, they considered them gods, although they weren't. They were more technologically advanced humans.
In the air.
These humans knew something was going to happen, and they hid. When they hid, the people had to fend for themselves through a cataclysm. Survivors of that cataclysm in 2647 BC were left in a different type of world, and the first thing they did was employ what they knew best: sympathetic magic. It's a cargo cult type phenomenon. I'm going to explain cargo cult here in a minute. But the sympathetic magic was to draw these giant effigies in the ground, and because they had a belief that it would attract the gods back. If we draw, we know that the gods liked monkeys, so let's draw a real friendly looking monkey and let's put it all out. The survivors had the benefit of being the descendants of people who were technologically advanced. They still had applied mathematics. They still had a lot of stuff. They just didn't have an infrastructure anymore. So they were able to lay out the measurements and get these right. But they're all sky facing for a reason, because the very people that had raised them and educated them and took care of them before the cataclysm, that's where they disappeared to. They just took to the skies. They were gone. So they disappeared from history and didn't reappear until after another cataclysm, which was centuries later. But in my Chronicon, I divide the vapor canopy world. It is the pre-flood world. For those who need a reference to this, the Great Flood of the Bible is the same thing as the Norse traditions, the day the sky fell. The reason the Great Flood and the day the sky fell is the same event is because there was a watery mesosphere, a vapor canopy, and that vapor canopy world was basically the marsupial world. And we'll get to that here in a minute. And it's the reason why only in the southern hemisphere did marsupials survive. The climate was totally wrong north of the equator. But this world had collapsed. In the biblical narrative, it's called the Great Flood. It wasn't a flood that flooded the entire world. It was flash flooding all over the world. There's a distinction because there were survivors in every culture around the world. They just had to hit the high ground. But during the vapor canopy world, as I'll discuss here in a minute, I had some slides for you to show you maps of what the world looked like during the vapor canopy. It was totally different. We have a world full of seas and oceans. We have to navigate and sail everywhere. But back in ancient times, there was nowhere you had to sail that was more than 2 days because everywhere it was a walk. You could trek overland almost around the entire world. So when the vapor canopy collapsed, that's when all these wingless birds, that's when all these marsupials of the southern hemisphere were cut off from each other. And only in the largest areas, because marsupials are very colonial type mammals, they're not like placentals. So these marsupials thrive when there's a bunch of them together, especially when there's no predator. They're also nocturnal, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. Vapor canopy was a dark world, but things grew to astonishing sizes. And I discussed this in my other videos.
So as well as with the waters, that obviously came from the vapor canopy, but they also say it came up from below as well. Is that right?
Yeah, well, geothermal heat would have been fountains blowing up from underground everywhere. Yes, there's no doubt. I mean, I'm pretty sure you're aware that the entire world is sitting basically on limestone caverns that are full of water. They're absolutely packed full of water. So
yeah, okay, so they're all blasted.
we don't sink because they're pretty far down there, but believe me, there's all kinds of flues. But there is a simple fact as to why so many unique animal and plant species survived the collapse of the vapor canopy, which was the cause of this immense flash flooding that we're talking about. It's a sustained inundation and tsunamis, all these things that overtook coastal regions. But let me show you this map. I got this map right here of what Australia would look like if the sea levels rose 230 feet. By your standard, at 70 meters. Let me show you what Australia is going to look like if we had another vapor canopy today and it suddenly collapsed and all of a sudden the sea levels went up 270 feet. This is what Australia would look like. And this basically taps directly into a video I did on my channel explaining why on the next cataclysm, Australia is going to be prime real estate. This is Australia.
Yes.
If the sea levels were increased by 270 feet.
I have this map too. Yep.
What this tells us is, unlike the rest of the world, Australia's elevations and its geography will protect its inhabitants from the flooding, from the tsunamis. There will be an inland sea created right there where you see it, but most of Australia is going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's going to be all
that's
right.
all uninhabited anyway. Wow, because there's actually a map that looks like that, and it's dated. What's it dated? 1828, I think it's dated. That shows it like a big inland sea. Like, I mean, one of my questions, just as a side note, is like with all these maps, have we got the wrong dates? Do you think they're dated incorrectly? Because we just see.
Oh, of course. So, yeah. See, here's the deal, man. I'll entertain this tangent real quick. It's not going to take me too far off track. Listen, maps could get you killed 600 years ago. If you were a navigator and your ship was taken by someone else and you didn't have a letter of marque to show the provenance of a map, where you got it, because maps were relied on. It was the captain was responsible for the life of the crew, and he was responsible. It was maritime law. Every single geographical feature you ever come across must be entered into the ship's log with the closest coordinates you can. Listen, when ships arrived in ancient ports, when I say ancient, I'm talking about 700 years ago, 600 years ago, 500, 400 years ago. Listen, their ship logs, these harbor masters, they had massive power. Harbor masters were just like intelligence agencies. They had the ability to go through every ship's log that came into their harbor and docked. They were able to board any ship, go in there, look at all their maps, and these maps that were put together became very secret government projects. And when the Portuguese were mapping the entire world, it was the Spanish that were at war with them. It was the Genoans that were at war with them. It was the English and the French that were at war with them. Everybody was hungry for information because everybody knew that the Portuguese had inherited all the maps of the Knights Templar. They knew that Henry the Navigator had all the information, the maps that were thousands of years old, that had accurate topographies, and they wanted that. And this is the time period where the Portuguese and Henry the Navigator basically rebelled, and the Knights Templar started flying what's called the Jolly Roger. This is the black pirate flag with a skull. It was basically an FU. We're not giving the information up, because they had maps of Central America or North America. They knew where stone fortresses were located all throughout Texas, Louisiana, going up the Mississippi Valley. They had all that mapped out, but they weren't going to share it. So a lot of these pirate incidences that are recorded in history had nothing to do with actual piracy. It was the people in possession of these materials that were labeled as pirates, and then different governments and navies hunted them down. So this, yeah, that's a fascinating. You know what? That piracy may be a video for you and I in the future, Campbell.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
that sounds interesting.
Blackbeard, yeah. I love Blackbeard. Englishman named Edward Teach, who finally had enough, and he just became a pirate. The Charles Hapgood, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. This is a book in my library. I have it right here. But Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings is fantastic because it shows from the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s. He shows that all these maps that were in the possession of Cristobal Colon, which you know of as Christopher Columbus. Cristobal Colon had a bunch of maps. It's the reason why, even though it was known that he was Jewish, the House of Castile still funded his deal, even though in the exact same year of 1492, they expelled 800,000 Jews from Spain in the same time that they funded him about America. Because he was the man, he had access to the maps that they wanted, so they funded him. But anyway, like I said, hey, I'm gonna entertain those tangents. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna take off.
Good, thank you. All right. So
anyway,
Australia. Yeah.
So every zoologist who actually knows what they're doing, who specializes in marsupials, will tell you that almost 100% of all marsupials are nocturnal. And that's very interesting, because not all mammals by any stretch of the imagination are nocturnal. Not all placentals are nocturnal. So why are all marsupials not nocturnal? Now, marsupials are very different than placentals. So it's a very different species of mammal. It's like a proto-mammal. It's like there were mammals that developed under an entirely different biosphere. And the species that are alive today of marsupials only survived because for thousands of years they were geographically located in an area with zero predators. The predators, like the dingo and all that, were introduced later. But we'll get to that. That's a whole nother study. The dingo is not really native to Australia. It was an introduction.
Yeah, from Thailand.
So,
yeah. So,
anyway,
did you say placentals? Is that what?
Yes. So, okay.
What are they?
Okay, marsupials are a totally different class of mammal. All right. You and I are mammals. Dogs are mammals. Horses, bulls, goats, seals, whales. They're all mammals because the mothers basically have the baby in a membrane sac, and then once the baby is developed enough, the sac is passed through the uterine wall, and then a baby is born. And then the sac is removed by the mother. Dogs lick the sacs off their puppies, all that stuff like that. Okay, that's placentals. All right. It's almost as if mammals are a parasite. However, marsupials are simpler than that, but they have more complex biologies. It's very unusual. The marsupial biology is tailored for a life in the darkness. It's also tailored to survive extreme heat temperatures. And this is vapor canopy conditions. I've done several videos on the vapor canopy, and one of them is about all the Native American traditions about the vapor canopy world. And the common denominator about the ancient Americans, they all said the same thing. There was no sun. It was a dark purple sky, but it was always hot. It was very hot. It was a canopy. So under this world, it was different types of people, different types of species, different types of technologies. There were still cities and all that, but their technology operated in a different way than today. We live in a different biosphere. So
Jason, are you putting this at about 3,000 years ago? Where are you putting this timeline?
Okay,
with the vapor canopy.
Okay, the vapor canopy ended and totally collapsed after at least 16 centuries. It was there in the historical record. It's called the antediluvian world. It collapsed in 2239 BC in the month of May. It was a phoenix phenomenon collapse. Now, something known in the ancient world as the phoenix appeared in the sky, and whatever it did, it caused this whole canopy to just rain on humans for about 40 days. Caused flash flooding, but it also began worldwide all the sun calendars, because before that time the sun was unknown. Everything was lunar based and everything was stellar based. Everybody's calendars during that time counted days. Every single turning of the stars around Alpha Draconis, the eye of the dragon, was a single revolution. It was a single day. Days were counted in ancient times. Years were counted only after the collapse of the canopy.
That actually times. So I used to study under a teacher called Ramtha, and he tells his life story, and he times with that. He said that there was a vapor canopy over the whole realm, that they never saw the sun, that the stratosphere was pierced with a weapon, and that brought down the canopy, and then the floods came, and that's what sunk Lemuria in our timeline.
Hey, that's pretty interesting to me, because my very first video from a wooden shack on a tablet was called the Phoenix Weapon. From the very beginning, I've treated it as a weapon because that's how it acts. But that's really interesting.
He said the weapon was crystal based, and it was basically a weapon that they were using fighting entities that were in the realm of Mars.
Okay.
And and so they actually misused it. It pierced the stratosphere and brought the canopy down. And that was the first time they'd ever seen the sun, and it also brought the snows and the flooding.
That's interesting.
And sunk Lemuria, and eventually the whole continent.
Wow. Well, when the vapor canopy collapsed, and you could put in your mind, we're talking about the Great Flood. We're talking about ancient America, the birth of the sun. We're talking about in Sumerian history, the appearance of Utu Shamash. Utu Shamash was the very last Sumerian god to ever appear. Sumerian history was vapor canopy, but at the very end of Sumerian history, a new god appeared, and they call him Utu Shamash. And anybody who looks at a Sumerian syllabary, you'll see that Utu and Shamash both mean the sun. One is Babylonian, one is Sumerian. But that was just a whole new god. They just added a new god to their pantheon at the very end of their civilization. But when the vapor canopy collapsed, when the vapor canopy collapsed, the placental mammals, they didn't adapt well or survive in Australia. We're talking about lions, tigers, bears. We're talking about raccoons. We're talking about the normal mammals that are around the entire rest of the world, outside of New Zealand, outside of New Caledonia, outside of Tasmania, and outside of Australia. We're talking about the normal mammals that the rest of the world is familiar with. They didn't survive in the Australian, like the marsupials. The marsupials took to the night. They basically just switched their time over. But being nocturnal and adapted to heat, Australia was perfect for them. I'm telling you is the marsupials were worldwide because the vapor canopy was worldwide. but they didn't survive. Just like the regular placental mammals like lions, tigers, and bears couldn't survive in the Australian outback and all that, the marsupials could. The inverse is true for the marsupials. They were worldwide too. We have marsupial fossils all over the world, but they're not all over the world anymore, except for one that has been spread all over the world. That's the opossum. But other than that, there's like 400 different species of marsupials, and they're just right there in the southern hemisphere. So I always thought that was really interesting. I've done a lot of research on the marsupials and all that, but it's not just them. We'll get to the flightless birds too. But lowering the sea level to vapor conditions would make many islands much larger and shallows to be above sea level. Just imagine it in your mind. Much of the Pacific would be walkable, and the distances between islands and gigantic land surfaces, it'd only be 1 or 2 or 3 days sail. Easter Island in the South Pacific on the South American side is absolute proof that the sea levels have raised drastically, because the gigantic heads on rock, the island of Easter Island, and would have required a massive forest and an island that is far larger than the one that is there now. The evidence, the infrastructure and architecture that was left behind shows a sedentary race, a race that was widespread, and they came from their homes to do building, and they did it at their leisure. They had workshops, and tools were all laid out when the cataclysm occurred. When the cataclysm occurred, they dropped their stone hammers and their copper chisels. They dropped everything, because that's exactly where archaeologists found them. In my book, When the Sun Darkens, which was published in 2009, I have a lot about that. I discuss it for about 2 pages. It's called Gaudian Deluge. But when the final destruction happened to Easter Island, it was already now a sacred site that people had to sail to finish the building. But originally, it was a huge mountain community attached to a city, just like Metallinim. I don't know if you know about the ILAP and the Carolines, but is a basalt city that is completely underwater in the Pacific, but it wasn't built underwater. You follow me? This is something some of your listeners can Google. You can Google the ruins of the Isle of Yap. It will blow your mind to see those pictures of what's been found there. Japanese archaeologists have found 8-foot tall skeletons in the 1930s. No, these aren't coins. They had basalt. They built their all their structures were built out of basalt columns, octagonal crystalline basalt columns. We don't even know how you can lift something like that. A forklift would flip over trying to lift over one of those basalt columns. But that's in the Pacific though. And it shows that we're only looking at a settlement that was at the top of a mountain.
Well, Easter Island,
flightless birds. Most people ignore this enigma, but flightless birds, there's so many different kinds, but they're native only to the southern hemisphere. Many different species. Can you guys hear me? Because it says my internet connection might be unstable.
We can hear you.
We can hear you. Yep. Oh, there you are. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, but they're only native to like the southern hemisphere. They didn't develop independently, but they did. So in a world where the land bridges were in place, all lands were connected in the southern hemisphere. The vapor canopy world was one gigantic landmass with lakes, seas, and rivers, just the opposite of what it is today, which is almost all Oceania and just broken up with land. It wasn't like that. This is why you see these geometrical patterns in Indonesia. When you look at a map, you see like fingers coming off of Asia going out into the ocean. All those are ridge lines to ancient mountain ranges. And if you use your imagination and just put the water lower and lower, you'll see the land spread out. It was all dry land at one time. But the marsupials, they may not have been native to the southern hemisphere. There is evidence they were worldwide, but that's where they survived in the largest concentrations. And this too is a clue. In the southern hemisphere, the insects, flora, and fauna of the vapor canopy world, they died out north of the equator, but they continued to survive in the south. So did the flightless birds. They were worldwide too. Flightless birds and marsupials are so widespread in the southern hemisphere because much of the landmass was passable land bridges until the day the sky fell. It was a Phoenix event that altered the sea levels and isolated Australia from the rest of the world today.
Yeah, that makes total sense, because I've always understood that New Zealand and Australia were completely, you could walk to New Zealand from Australia, that they're all interconnected, that we are in essence living on the highest points of the realm, that everything else is underwater. And you're right, I've always known that the ridges are the mountain ranges, and that's been since the vapor canopy has disappeared. Yeah.
Well, the whole Easter Island thing too, I was going to say, is the story we get is that they were so stupid that they cut every single tree on the island down, and that killed their society. I mean, that doesn't make sense. But what makes sense is the forest were lower down. Yeah.
That was a very stupid description. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but if all the forest got flooded, then that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's another map put out by somebody that shows what a world would look like if the sea level was lower.
Yeah.
Oh wow! Yeah, that is Australia in the middle there. Wow.
Yeah, that's Australia, New Zealand. They're all connected.
Yeah, all connected. Yeah,
they're all connected to Indonesia, and it's a 2-day sail to Thailand.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. That makes sense. So we've been looking at the craters here in Australia and the realm, which we've been taught were sort of meteor craters from long ago. But everyone we've studied, Jace, is like, there's been no actual rocks. There's been no meteors. There's been no actual evidence of a meteor coming down, but they all seem to be functioning as aqueducts, basically as giant plug holes. And they've all got water coming up from underneath them, especially here in Australia. So we assumed, or started theorizing, that the waters actually came up from underneath, like giant plug holes.
Well, I can buy that. Because I mean, right here in the United States, we have some that are absolutely geometrically perfect. Bowls. It's not an impact, and they don't even have the striations coming off of them that you see on the moon, like impact deals. So I never really entertained that there would be water, but there are references in many texts outside Genesis that talk about the foundations of the great deep and how the abyss has come to the surface. So yeah, I can go with that, but even more so, I regard these giant holes as calderas. These are like massive outgassing when internal pressure is built up so much. When that internal pressure is built so much, it literally just explodes underground, and it finds a way out. And when it does, it creates this tube that's several miles down and comes straight up to the surface, blows out, it's done outgassing, and once it settles, it turns into that beautiful little ball. And we've seen many of these. There's one in Arizona. There's a real popular one in Arizona called a Mile Wide Crater.
It seems similar here in Australia, like because most of ours are out in it looks like just the flat desert plains now, but there's no Derbis around there. It's just like these round, I mean, bowls is a good way of describing them, in the middle of these very flat plains with no rocks or Derbis around them. So we've been looking at them because of obviously Australia being so, like, the whole mass of the whole continent is now just deserted, and very red sand, very red. The whole of the continent famous for being this red outback.
I'm going to tell you now, you got a lot of that in 1902. A whole lot of it. 1902.
1902.
But I tell you what, let's move real quick over to the Chinese. Y'all wanted to hear about the Chinese?
Yeah. Can we just touch?
Yeah, because we think Australia's always been China.
Yeah. We went to the Chinese museum in Melbourne, and we found out that the Chinese started the tobacco industry, the banana industry, the gold industry, the pearling industry. Tin, was it? Tin as well. Like all these industries.
Basically, every fundamental industry
very early in our history, and in very remote places. Like, how did they know where the resources were? So what do you got to say on that?
Okay, so well, I mean, you're probably already familiar with the Chinese presence in Australia. Is it's academically backed by a very controversial author who put out a book called 1421. You familiar with Gavin Menzies?
No.
Have you ever heard of Gavin Menzies? Okay, well, look, Gavin Menzies is not somebody that other scientists and academics can ignore, so he has not been attacked. They just regard him as an anomaly. But let me explain. Gavin Menzies his very well-researched book. I read it about 6 years ago. It's a simple title, 1421, The Year the Chinese Discovered the World. So he lays out his case. His book is about this thing. It's a fantastic book, but he lays out his case very scientifically with a lot of evidence. It's very compelling, but he cites a 3,500-year-old Chinese text describing the ancient Americas and what is believed to be the coasts of Australia. The Chinese navigators 3,500 years ago mapped it all out and then never did anything else with the text. So I can agree of the possibility, because I have documented that the Shang dynasty Chinese fled their country after a phoenix cataclysm in 1135 BC, and they sailed to Central America, and they were later known as the Olmecs. It's not just a light theory. I cite chapter and verse from all these different scientific reports of all these specialists who basically agree that there was 250,000 people who got on ships in 1135 BC and left because the mandate of heaven have changed in China, which means something happened in the sky and the people revolted because the emperor couldn't protect the people from what happened. Therefore, when the mandate of heaven changes, he's got to go. But 250,000 Chinese of the Shang dynasty went with him. 6 months later, they reappear in Central America and they take over Veracruz State, Oaxaca, and they become what we know of as the Old Mecca. Sounds like a fantastic story until you find out that all kinds of Chinese jade is found everywhere in Central America, Chinese statues, and now tablets with ancient Shang dynasty like inscriptions. So there's a lot of scholars now leaning toward this now, but it's all attached to a Phoenix disaster in 1135 BC. Later, over 700 years after that, a Chinese fleet left. They escaped Kaluga Khan. Kaluga Khan in 1291 invaded China, took it over, and a whole bunch of Chinese escaped, and they reappeared in ancient Mexico. So these are, I just read this from a 270-year-old book to my own subs on my own channel. I came into possession of a very old book on chronology and history, and I read that very passage to my subscribers. It blew my mind. It was a historical reference that I had never heard myself about that happened at that 700 years ago. I thought it was interesting. But the Chinese, to me, they would have only visited, explored, and departed a long time ago. Just as the Egyptians explored North America, as shown in the research of Barry Fell, William Corliss, one of my favorites, David Hatcher Childress. But the real mystery about Australia's most ancient inhabitants, the Aboriginals, to me, it doesn't lie with China. Yes, the Chinese might have had a foothold there. Yes, the Chinese might have had a head start to doing a lot of things. They're in that part of the world before the Europeans basically scouted the area out and did all kinds of stuff, after a former civilization was already erased. But the real mystery to Australia, I'm going to tell you now, it comes from Dravidic India. Have you ever heard that?
No.
I've heard that something
you
to
have
do with the
Camel?
languages. I've heard that there's a language.
Yes, there's linguistic studies now that show the ancient Vedic Sanskrit, the language that was spoken when they read Sanskrit is very similar to the old Aboriginal syllables. The way their sentence structure, syntax, all that. It's very interesting. There is now DNA evidence. There is now DNA evidence.
Looks similar, don't they, to Aboriginals? Maybe not the same coloring, but physically they are kind of, tall and thin.
They're identical. They're identical.
Okay,
I don't know why anybody has never made the connection before. I don't know why, because the Dravidian India was
dark Indian. Yeah, for sure.
Yes, it's the dark Indian. There was always two cultures in India. One was very light colored, almost Mediterranean, almost Near Eastern, and the Dravidians were always very, very dark and black, and they were only in the southern half of India, close to Australia. So look, there is now DNA evidence. It's no longer theoretical. There's DNA evidence, according to scientists in India, that the ancient Dravidians are indeed linked to the Aboriginals of Australia. There are writers who are now claiming Dravidians departed India about 4,000 years ago and arrived to Australia. But the problem is the world changed and there was no way they could get back. There was no going back home. They were stuck there. So whether they joined with the Aboriginals that were already in Australia is a very distinct possibility. or if they remain distinct, it's just not known. Now, this would have been easy for the vapor canopy because it was a drier world. From India to Australia, 99% of the journey was an overland trek. Look at these maps. Look at this.
Wow. Wow, okay.
You can see where Australia is.
Yep.
There's not a single bit of water between Australia and India.
Yep.
You see that continent Lemuria way out in the Pacific?
Yes.
Where Eastern Island was? That means really close to Australia was a whole other supercontinent.
Yes.
This is what would happen if you pull all the water back and put it back in the mesosphere where it started. Way 3.5 miles up, way up there, an ocean, a whole layer of atmosphere that's actually an ocean.
So would they
put that water back?
People as well?
Yeah, during the vapor canopy, everything. Yeah, I have videos on my channel that explain the scientific research of the Creation Research Institute from Glen Rose, Texas. They built a biosphere and they replicated vapor canopy conditions, and they made fruit flies, roaches, and beetles grow 3 times their normal size and live 3 times longer.
Wow.
Yeah. They did that in Texas. They did that in Texas.
That's like the opposite to our theory, Campbell, because we were looking at it being an impact of a sun that people grew bigger, like as in plants today, and put them in the shade, they grow smaller. But the canopy, like there's no sun in that. It's just a very thick sort of biosphere, I guess. So that brings up a change in the atmosphere. Yeah.
So actually under the vapor canopy conditions, the scientists in Texas were also surprised to find out that plants grow better in the dark under that ultraviolet light that would have passed through the vapor canopy than direct sunlight, which harms them.
Wow, that's like the opposite to what we've been saying, Campbell. That's so interesting. Excellent. Yeah, okay.
So we'll continue with the Vedic deal because look, there's let me see here. There's a passage. Listen, there's a passage in the Vedic Ramayana that a bridge was formed between India and Sri Lanka years ago, made by monkeys. It was made by monkeys. Now, it doesn't sound like that would relate to Australia, but check this out. I'm convinced the locals saw monkeys using a natural land bridge to pass between the 2 land masses, and it was just assumed by the locals that monkeys made it. They probably just seen monkeys going out there in the ocean and then coming back. Well, whatever. And then that's what they assumed, and this tradition grew up out of that. But this is only referenced here to show that land bridges are indeed mentioned in ancient texts of India. That's just one text. But the ancient texts of India are rife with empires and kingdoms and land masses that were off their coast that totally disappeared. Much of the Vedic literature is about these civilizations that are now underwater. In this passage, from southern India to Australia over natural land bridges, when the sea level was much lower due to a vapor canopy, it's confirmed in 2 amazing finds that I've come across. You guys might know more, but there may be more. But statues found in Australia greatly resemble 2 Vedic deities. One is Hanuman and one is unmistakably Ganesh, the elephant deity. Let me show you. These are found in Australia. These are Vedic statues. This is the artwork of ancient India. The elephant is Ganesh, Ganesh, and the other one is Hanuman.
Where were they found, Jason?
I don't know what this place is called, but it's called the Gympie district of Queensland.
Gympie. There's a pyramid in Gympie. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, it says they were excavated in Gympie, and I thought y'all would like that. But I wanted to show that the archaeology confirms tradition, and tradition confirms the geography, and geography is confirmed by the genetic testing. Everything points to ancient India now.
Wow, fascinating. We have never had. We've had a few elders on the show, and no one's ever made a link to India ever, have they?
No,
well, that's a fascinating thing for us to talk to
about
getting on some of our indigenous.
Thinking because the Australian originals always say that they're the oldest civilization. But so does the Vedic tradition, right? They say the same thing.
They do say the same thing. They do say the same. Look, but the situation under the vapor canopy was more complex, though, than just land bridges. The legends and memories from that part of the world, the southern hemisphere, they're rife with stories of fantastic supercontinent, a kingdom called Lemuria, or a continent. Sometimes it's called Mu. Other times, in ancient Vedic texts, it's called Kumari Kingdom, and it's a vast landmass that was populated by the ancient Tamil civilization. It's the Atlantis of the Pacific, is what it is. Now, I'm going to show you this book. This book is by David Hatcher Childress. It documents a wide variety of artifacts, archaeological anomalies, legends, ancient texts. It's just fascinating. This is one of my favorite authors because he goes to the very places that he talks about. But this book needs to be read by everyone. Lost Cities of Ancient Lemuria in the Pacific. This book.
Oh yes,
hold on.
I've seen.
Hold on, let it focus. It'll focus in. It'll focus in.
Yep.
I don't know why my screen's not focusing right. There it is. There it is.
Yeah, we got it. We got it.
Right there. Screenshot that. One of the best books you'll ever read. Let me tell you something. This man will teach you things about New Zealand, Tasmania, and Australia you've never heard before. Yeah. No. This David Hatcher Childress wrote a fascinating book, but it's New Guinea, Australia, New Zealand, New Caledonia. Look, they were attached to the Tonga Islands, where there have been found massive dolmens, trilithons, ancient megalithic architecture, and islands that are isolated, and yet they're populated with people. Now, what I just showed you on this picture, New Caledonia, it has 400 unnatural hills made of ancient cement that remain a mystery. I'm going to show you this. This is a true archaeological find. This is vapor canopy technology here. I'm going to show you. You were talking about flight.
Yeah.
Well, things that fly require power sources. So let me show you something. All that looks like to a casual observer in New Caledonia, all that looks like is 400 like tumuli, however you say it. These are hills. Now, it was very unusual, and for over 100 years, nobody really thought to even look at them because they thought they were burial grounds. That's what they thought they were. Somebody had buried giants, these big old hills, but that's not what they found. So when they found, I'm going to show you what they found. And what they found inside is so anomalous that they had to dig up another one. Then they dug up another one. Then they dug up over 40 of them, and they confirmed, okay, yeah, you know what? Every single one of these have the exact same construction inside. What hasn't been explained today is what the hell is it? I'm going to show you. Okay, this is one of the first illustrations done over 100 years ago of the inside of a hill. Now, somebody was very specific in putting, it was cement. They know it's cement because it has snail shells in it. It's been mixed. It's with lime and mortar. Somebody made this. The only problem is it's dated 5100 BC. It's dated 7,000 years ago. Now, all 400 hills look basically like this, but I'm going to go into more detail now. Later scientists went and looked at them, and they got a much better analysis. This is what they look like inside, each one of them, 400 of them. Now, that's anomalous. That's anomalous. But what's more mysterious is we have absolutely there's no traditions, there's no records of a civilization here in New Caledonia. And the excavations reveal cement cylinders laid in gravel, vertical, layered in rings of iron nodules. Listen, the discovery of these small snails proves that it's a mixture made by people, by men. There's nothing natural about this. The structuring of these mounds suspiciously looks just like the Baghdad battery found in Iraq, which actually produces 70 volts of electricity. And that's now. We don't know how much it did back then when you actually packed it with everything you needed for the compost. But here's 400 batteries, charging stations, way out in New Caledonia. Remember David Hatcher's theory about the Vimanas? They needed to charge and they needed to stop somewhere, and then before they made the trip all the way over the Pacific. So it's Yeah, it's dated at 5100 BC, but this would be a vapor canopy type technology. I believe that discoverers pretty much know what it is, but it's so unbelievable they're not publishing it. So it's just
Wow. Because
it's
there's
such
an
an anomaly.
island, isn't there? In I can't remember what the island is, but it's covered in jars.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Yeah,
I've seen that too.
Could be the same kind of
I've seen
thing,
that too.
possibly. Yeah, wow.
So here's something really interesting. You remember you asked me a question. You asked me a question earlier. What time period are we looking at when we were talking about this disaster? And when they drew these giant agroglyphs, so because to them the gods had abandoned them and they totally left, so they were employing sympathetic magic to try to draw the gods back down. Okay, you asked me, and I told you the date was 2647 BC, which was a phoenix year. It was a phoenix cataclysm. It was known to come, and that's why the elite vanished. They were gone, and they left behind all these other people to fend for themselves. Okay. You can imagine my surprise when I was basically just going through different websites, because I don't really use the internet for a source of material at all. But I was just going through different websites, seeing just basically what was the general creation story for the Aboriginals. What did they believe in their ancient past? Man, look, in my studies on Australia, I came across the research of scientists at the University of New South Wales. I didn't want to quote anybody outside of Australia. You know what I mean? I wanted to stick, these people would know best because they're there geographically there. So, but they had collected a lot of Aboriginal traditions and pieced together that basically the Aborigines had described to them a cataclysm involving the sun that happened 47 centuries earlier. And they described it as a fire devil that crashed to the earth. Now, this astonished them because, one, evidently the sun wasn't very well known, and it wasn't believed that anything could come from the sky that was fiery. Now, they don't ever say vapor canopy. They don't ever say that there was a firmament above made of all that water. But what these scientists have concluded makes sense. Why the Aborigines would have been in such disbelief that something made of fire could have fell from the sky. But the date was 47 centuries ago. That is within 30 years of 2647 BC when that Phoenix cataclysm comes. You know, when you're talking about scientific estimates, that's a bullseye, because most of the time in anthropology, they're going to say plus or minus 100 or 200 years. That's a scientific bullseye. This Aboriginal tradition about and to them, that would be the great disaster. Because remember now, put things into proper context. To the Aboriginal, the last great cataclysm was during the vapor canopy, when something fiery fell from the sky, caused a disaster, and all the individuals that they looked up to, builders of infrastructure, all what they considered was gods, vanished and left them and abandoned them. To them, that was their nightmare. But later, 552 years later, was the Great Flood, the day the sky fell, the collapse of the vapor canopy. But the Aboriginals didn't fear that date. There are no flood traditions in ancient Aboriginal deal. Why? What did I show you about Australia? Australia is like a refuge from cataclysm. It is the place you need to be when the Phoenix phenomenon does these major events all over the world. Australia is a haven. Aboriginals had no idea there was a great flood. There was a day the sky fell. They didn't know anything about it because Australia was unaffected. The absolute proof Australia was unaffected is the fact that there's over 200 and something species of marsupials that are there, cannot be found anywhere else in the entire world.
Nice.
So that's interesting, because I've always understood that Australia sits on a very unique platonic plate, and that we actually make up the ring of fire, and any sort of movement on these platonic plates would cause massive, cataclysms around this continent. So massive floodings. So that sort of plate shift actually is protective for Australia, protects us versus breaking it apart.
Yeah, there's something about the geography. I mean, you saw that map when you add, look, 200. Look, if you just add 20 feet of sea level. Do you have any idea how many cities around the world will be completely flooded out?
Destroyed, yeah.
Whole subway systems and underground infrastructure. All their power, everything, telecommunications will be all completely knocked out. That's 20 feet of coastal cities all around the world. But Australia's barely affected, even at 270 feet. The ocean level rises. So, Australia has very unique geography.
Yeah, right. Because we're
interesting.
We're a high land mass. I mean, the Great Australian Bight is basically a big cliff, isn't it? So,
well, the Great Dividing Range, that's like a whole, mountainous range sort of. I would say that's about 2 hours inland of the coastline all around Australia almost. Certainly from Queensland right through New South Wales to Victoria. Yeah.
All right. So
I know all these places. You guys mentioned these places like New South Wales and Victoria and Queensland. I know them because I've been mailing packages to all over Australia. But I don't know where these places are. I haven't really looked on a map to see them. I just know their names now.
Yeah.
I have to come down one day.
Yeah. So okay.
You mentioned 1902 and the red dust. Obviously, Australia's the red continent.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think I might have mentioned it too when you and Howdy and I were on, but Charles Fort in the 1930s published the Book of the Damned. Then he followed it with Low in the New Lands and Strange Talents or something like that. But he had amassed all the scientific reports from 1901 and 1902 and 1903 where something very anomalous happened. And scientists were baffled that the first thing that was seen was astronomers were looking at red dust veils that were passing through what they said was the inner solar system. Now, I believe the sky is totally 100% simulated, but that simulation doesn't mean that astronomers that have bought into the lie are not actually seeing phenomena that's being projected for them to see, because the sky is sentient. It is very, very it's full of trickery, and it will produce the phenomena that you expect to observe. And these astronomers have been documenting since the 1700s all these things that they see. And when one astronomer publishes a report that, hey, Saturn has rings, now all of a sudden other astronomers look in that area, they look at that luminary and they look through it, and as they study it, they start rings of Saturn. Then they begin to publish it and they confirm that. Then it's peer reviewed by other people who study it and then say the same thing, that Jupiter has like 27 moons, while other astronomers confirm it after they study it. It's because the simulacrum itself, this sky holography, feeds them the very imagery that they're searching for. So as this continues on, we build this great, massive body of fallacy that we call astronomy, and we perpetuate it. And people who have never looked through a telescope now believe all these things are true about the sky. And I mean, it's okay. I don't care if people believe it or not. But in 1902, astronomers were looking through telescopes. Well, actually, in 1901, they were looking at telescopes and they saw red dust veils coming toward Earth from Venus, and they documented that. And then some of them wrote them in as nebulae. They didn't really know what it was. Then all of a sudden, in 1901, red sand started raining on American cities. Then red sand started falling on European cities. Throughout 1902, in the month of February, March, April, May, June, July, and August, red mud, red sand, red rains fell all over the world and documented everywhere. I have my own subscribers are always sending me little pieces of newspaper from 1901, 1902, and 1903 that they see in their local archives, or the microfiche. It's 1902 has become a really a topic of fascination for a lot of my subs. They're always sending me unique things that they found out about 1902 that I never covered in my 2 published books about it, or I got like 41 or 42 Phoenix videos I never covered. I have 5 videos on 1902, and I listed a lot of the anomalies that happened in 1902, but my subscribers have sent me far more than I ever found myself. They've been pretty engaged in that. But yes, these scientists studied these under microscope, this dust, and it depends on what samples were taken, but in every single incident they contained organic compounds. In Rome, scientists were swearing it was blood. They said it had corpuscles in it. It's some type of blood. Now, organic materials falling from the sky is nothing new. Same thing happened in 1347. In 1347, all the locals said that cigar-shaped objects appeared in the sky, opened their bellies and dropped decomposed and chopped up bodies of stags, pigs, raccoons, squirrel, all kinds of forest animals had been like run through a blender and then just let to decompose in some type of holding cell. And then once they were fetid and rancid and full of disease, they were dumped in the forest. And these are the actual historical accounts that were written down in 1347 concerning the origin of the Great Black Death Plague. However, in the history books, our teachers have told us that rats carrying fleas from China aboard wooden ships brought the plague from China to Europe, and it's total bullshit. That's not the truth. I go by what the historians were saying that were alive at the time, and not what we're being told today. So organic materials being fallen from the sky is nothing new. Charles Fort documented many of them. But in 1902, which was the last year of the Phoenix, this is what happened all around the world. And in some incidents in Oceania, there were ship captains that had to call all hands on deck just to push with brooms and whatever tool they could find all the red mud off their ships before their ships capsized. And these are written in the captain's logs. That's how bad it was. And Australia was one of the hardest hit for this red dust phenomena in 1901 and 1902.
So Jay, so what have you? How are you explaining the red dust? What explanation has that got?
Well, I am not on board with the media's. The media always says that Sahara dust is the explanation for when Chinese cities have this red dust falling on, when the cities in Europe have this red dust. It's been happening in the past 2 or 3 years several times. Australia has the red dust coming, and the media is always going to tell us the story that the red dust is kicked up from the deserts of whatever's convenient. If it's the Taklamakan Desert that's closest to it, they'll blame that one. If it's the Sahara, even deserts with yellow sand have been blamed for red dust.
Yeah.
So no, I believe that this stuff is coming from the sky. I don't know where it's coming from the sky, but I have always told the people on my channel that the sky is simulated and it's hiding something else. What you see isn't really there, but the mechanics of the sky have been observed in different times, like in 1566, in 1561, when it seems like the sky sim suffered a power failure. And I have videos about that too, what Europeans witnessed and what they saw and what the woodcuts show us that were drawn at the time, because people couldn't process what they saw. It was so inexplicable. It's like giant machinery in the sky. But then the power source, I guess, came back online, and these things are quickly forgotten because they can't be explained. Okay. But they're entered into the historical record, and they're just left as little side notes in different old books and stuff.
That's fascinating, because it was only yesterday Campbell and I were like talking about the floating city concept, and we're just like, we know fucking nothing about the sky. Nothing. We have no understanding of what the sky is or what it really is. So to actually have this conversation with you today and hear you talk about it being a simulation, we're totally on board with that. So I didn't even know that there was actually historical records where it actually like turned itself off and people saw past the simulation. And you're saying that they saw machinery.
Well, they don't know what they saw, because the frames of reference in 1566 and 1561, they don't know what they were looking at. In 1752, something similar happened, and the people could only describe it as what it geometrically looked like to them at the time. And it looked like the sky was filled with an octagonal star, and that octagonal star started spitting fire at them, and some of these flames hit different areas on the ground. So don't know. So we have to, when we research things in ancient history and more contemporary times, it's always best to try to interpret these things from the frames of reference that were known at that time. I'll give you an example. Today we talk about aliens and crop circles, okay? But the exact same thing was happening in 1688 when somebody had carved a woodcut because they were astonished that in their cornfield a crop circle had appeared and they saw devils dancing in the ring. But 300 years before that, they were described in Viking tales, and it was always elves or dwarves that were making these rings and stuff. These crop circles, these agroglyphs have been happening for thousands of years, but they're always described only by the frames of reference that are most well known to that civilization. Today it's aliens. Aliens are doing it. Or HARP technology. The government's doing it with satellites. You're going to hear everything but the truth. It all goes by frames of reference, but it's some other type of technology that's being incorporated here. It's a communication technology. Somebody's sending messages, and the best way to do it is through geometry. That's what these crop circles are about. That's why they get more and more elaborate. But about your cities in the sky, I had recently told the listeners on my channel that I had read a military report, and I have it in my notes. I've cited it in Chronicon, but it's very strange. This is not something I typically record as a chronologist. I had to do it because at the time I was a Christian. At the time, I believed 100% that the Bible was the Word of God, and I believe it is a holy book. But I believe it's a book of good and evil. It's up to you to find it. Now, at the time, I processed information differently, but I had put this aside because it was so anomalous. And it's an incident of the U.S. Air Force where they're describing a non-combat mission over the Pacific. And a B-52 with about 5 guys on board was a skeleton crew. They were going over the Pacific, and they crashed into an invisible barrier. And when the Navy found the remains of the ship, it looked like the tail had just been crunched all the way to the nose. Everything had been, whatever it hit, it had no yield. It was like a force field. It just hit it. There are things in the sky, little anecdotes like this. I keep these because I may not be able to build them into a narrative historically, but I have to keep them because they've got to be a part of my paradigm. I have to be able to incorporate everything. And that's why 2 years ago, I totally wrapped all my research around simulation theory. The Archaix data stands alone. I don't need simulation theory to put out my material. But on a personal level, which I don't mind sharing with people, on a personal level, I have to tell people that I'm a simulationist because there's nothing else that can put all this wide diversity of data into a cohesive understanding unless I'm understanding that this is all a computerized fiction. Nothing else makes sense.
There's too much.
I mean, Campbell, can you imagine actually like seeing the fucking sky turn off and like can you imagine the head fuck that would be for everyone, like just today, like going out and seeing the sky off and like and what's behind it. I mean, that is just a fucking awesome concept. And like I just love it. I mean,
so just as a thought,
talking about that missing,
if it's a simulation, do you have any thoughts on like where the edge is? Like is it Antarctica, or are we just in a confined area of, and then the rest
is it contained? Good question. Yep.
Well, I've made it very clear on my own channel that my research is chronology based. I also make the distinction many times between fact and opinion. Because there are many things that I assert as fact because I can show my sources and I can show the math. But when it comes to a question like this, I have to tell you, I have a suspicion. The flat earthers are right as far as the perimeters of our world and why we can't go farther. And I believe that insiders in the military industrial complex are actually protecting us. They're actually keeping us from finding out the actual truth. Because if the entire world actually found the whole truth, once ants find out they're in an ant farm, they don't act normal anymore. All they're gonna do is try to find a way out. Now, I believe that we might have done that with Operation Fishbowl. We might have done that. We might have attempted it several times, but we probably have a pretty good understanding because the military industrial complex is worldwide. It's multinational. It's not against each other.
Yeah.
Wars aren't what you think they are.
Yeah.
Wars are ways for banks to transfer the wealth of nations. That's what wars are for. It's the only reason wars are even fought. It's to transfer the wealth of nations illegally. It's when the collective wants to cannibalize a country or 2 or 3 countries, they invent the reason, and then they use a war to rape them of all their resources. That's what they do.
So what about the theory conceptually that the way out is down through the ocean and up out past the realm, past the container?
That's a beautiful concept. And it might be the true reason why we have so many submarines always patrolling. I don't know. It's just nothing I would ever know. It's I know that we can't go very deep. I mean, even our submarines can't go very deep. Pressure alone just totally implode them. So I don't know. But I do know that our world is vast. And just because I admit that we live under a solid vault that produces a holographic field that makes me believe in a cosmos, but it's actually a solid vault like a dome, just because I believe that doesn't mean the world is small.
No, God, no.
Because the world is still quite vast. It's a long way from east to west or from north to south. It's still a long way. And we are so microscopically tiny that the only reason why we even have an inkling of an idea that the world is sailable or the world is travelable is because we have this technological infrastructure that makes us all one community, like the internet. Without the internet, without being able to find all these things, like the world would be a very gigantic place. People would be attached to their communities and not to an international family. And that's the way it would be. So, and that's the way it will return. It's going to come back. The internet hasn't always been here, and I do believe that we have been set up for failure. As soon as people are almost 100% reliable on it, it will be taken from us. And I believe it's all by design. But
All right. So, just let me go back to the red sand, because I actually lived through. There was one sort of maybe 8 or 10 years ago here in Australia, and I actually lived through that event. And I was just in Newcastle at the time. It was outside of Sydney, and we woke up, and the whole atmosphere was yellow. And then we drove to Sydney, which is about an hour and a half, and everything was red. And it's not just the sky, it was like the very atmosphere, the very context of our version of air was colored. And then it was just a random day. We were actually traveling, and we drove through Sydney and out, and actually started hitting some of the rural communities, and they were reporting it being blue and being green. So there was this massive, this is in one day, and this is like a massive event. Do you remember it, Campbell, when it was massive? The whole of Sydney was bright red.
The pictures from Sydney.
Yeah. So I was actually there in that experience and traveling through it. And it was actually being reported as different colors on that one day. Wow. And so now I'm fascinated to consider the idea that was coming down from the sky, because it made no sense. Their story about it being, dust from the desert coming in was ridiculous. When I was traveling, I actually was going through it. But the idea of it coming down the sky being a simulation. So what would the context of that dust be? Oh, that's that.
Well,
red, you call it sand.
I will let your imagination run with that. And I'll just give you some more context. Listen to this. We have scientifically documented we're talking about the polar regions where there's nothing that can grow. It's only ice. Yes. And yet ship captains have reported that frozen crickets and cricket larvae were in the hundreds of thousands, were all over the ice. And some of them are still kicking like they just fell out the sky. How did they get there? Roaches, earthworms, and all that have been found encased in layers of ice as if it fell out of the sky. In 1867, 1868, and 1869, the UK suffered a storm of insects. They had to employ chimney sweeps all throughout Britain just to sweep the carcasses of the bugs and burn them because the plague broke out from the decomposition. But ship captains that were in between France and Britain were reporting rivers of insects falling out of a blue sky. So it's yes, we have incidents. We have incidents where the sky is producing all this material. We don't know why, but there is layers and layers and layers and layers in this world, but we're seeing more evidence those layers are deposits, not from water, from deluges and this in millions of years of geography, but from a massive dump from the sky for whatever reason. This is why so many ancient ruins have been found 60, 70, and 80 feet below ground, but there's no record of any time period of when it became down there. We have found many civilizations that were just so deep. Like, I mean, there's one in central Mexico for which the academia has done a great job covering up. But the archaeologist William Niven in 1907, 1908, 1909 excavated pyramids, pyramid cities, all kinds of amazing stuff in Central America near Acambaro. And when he discovered mammoth skeletons inside the tombs of some of these crypts and stuff, they shut him down. They went in there, they kicked him out of Mexico. They totally shut him down when he found written tablets in ancient Mesoamerican dialects or languages that they couldn't decipher, but they were in the same chambers as mammoth bones. As soon as he discovered something that was totally against the evolutionary idea of progressive development and natural selection, as soon as he showed that pyramid cities may have existed in an ice age type time with the megafauna, they shut his ass down. And he's not the only one. These sites have been shut down all over the world. There's toxodonts and elephants have been found inscribed in Central America and South America in ruins, but they've been removed. There are people like Colonel Fawcett and other people have documented these things from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. They did pen and ink illustrations of them out. That's how they used to document everything in archaeology. They always carried an artist with them, or sometimes the archaeologist was the artist. But now, when people visit those ruins, there's no evidence of elephants and elephant trunks and all that because they're not native to the Americas. Therefore, the establishment doesn't want you to know about all the transatlantic voyages and the fact that ships were capable of carrying elephants back then.
Well, that makes so much sense. And the first book I read that really opened my eyes up to my love for history was Forbidden Archaeology, like a long time ago. And from that moment on, the whole narrative collapsed. But can I just ask you, so when I'm sorry, I'm going back to the red sand falling from the sky, because as you talk, what I think is blood and bone, like fertilizer, like a substance of biology basically coming in, because we're getting obviously a lot of reports today of the skies turning red all the way through China, particularly China. And that's like flooded my feed for the last sort of 12 months. You too, Campbell, have you been seeing those reports of the red skies? Yeah. So, the idea of it being sort of like a biology that's being rained down to sort of like
increase
complement.
biodiversity,
Potentially laying the foundations for, I don't know, like a new laying the foundations for what is to come next, maybe. I mean, it's definitely, and have you found, Jace, that within history, have these sky events happened at certain times, or have they just spread all the way through history? Like, are they clumped together?
Oh, if you're talking about the phenomena of the red dust and red mud, I have only found those to be worldwide every 138 years. It's a very definitive timeline. However, in the 1800s and in the 1600s, I found several incidents, but they were always highly localized, like you're describing now. Here it is, 2022. We're still 18 years from the next Phoenix year, and yet there's red skies are happening. So I've seen a lot of these, like Egypt, 1447 BC, the Exodus, the Nile River turned red as blood. But we have many incidents in Pliny's natural history from the years 200 to 100 BC of the Tiber River in Rome turned red as blood. So there's also been blood rains. All throughout Roman history, there were many times where there were blood rains that shut down the government. They accepted that as an omen from the books of the Sibyl, and they refused to work and do administrative stuff because it was a sign from the gods that the gods were upset, so they sent a blood rain. Now, as far as your idea that this could actually be blood, I can see no departure from that. I don't like to talk about it because I don't want to be a doomsayer. Now we have to jump. We have to make a cognitive leap. Where's the blood coming from? What is it from? What life forms lost their life in order for that to happen? If that's indeed the case, because now we're opening up a can of worms. Of course, now we're opening up a can of worms that makes us have to go back into the original creation myths of many different cultures, because that's a common denominator. Not a common denominator is that in ancient times the human race was made from the blood of a god, or the blood of a titan, the blood of a giant. So now it opens up a whole other can of worms about. It's really hard to process. It's really hard for people to process that actual blood is falling from the skies, even though we've had scientists declare that.
Well, I can't ignore that, like in the last 2 years, as we've gone through the last sort of 2 years, like the whole focus on the adrenochrome running through the channels, that was all about blood. And that was like really exposed to the last 2 years. So that's just something side note to this conversation.
Lots of blood talk.
Lots of blood references coming through.
Sacrifice. Blood is definitely a theme that's connected to gods and all this kind of stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we don't even know if it's the actual material that we're talking about. It could actually be something to do with the color itself. It could be the color frequency that's actually being spread. There could be a connection there. Like, it's very 3D of us just to think it's the actual matter that's we're focusing on. It could be so much more. It could be the cymatics, the frequency, the vibration of this substance, this thing.
Could just be
I don't know the right word for it.
Could just be fertilizing the garden.
Have you guys seen that movie Night of the Comet from the 80s?
I haven't. No. I've heard you mention it. I think
yes. Well,
I'll make a note.
I mentioned it to Jay Dreamers, and he did a fantastic breakdown of the movie.
All right.
It's But it goes in line with what you're talking about. It's in the beginning of the movie, these people are hiding underground. They don't know that they're underground. They're in a World War II bunker that was turned into a movie theater, and they're in there and they're protected from this comet. When the comet passes over, everybody's outside waiting for the comet. The whole world's partying. They're all waiting, and when the comet passes over, Earth goes into the tail of the comet, and every single person that's exposed to it on the surface is reduced to red dust. And all you see is their clothes. All you see is their clothes and their watches and their rings. It's red dust everywhere. So the people that were deep in the subway systems and underground and in high-rise buildings underground, they come out the next morning and find New York City completely empty, and there's piles of red dust and clothes all over the city. And it takes them a while to figure out. A couple people were exposed. They turned to mutants and stuff. But through the movie, you figure out real fast that the government knew that something was going to happen. They were already waiting in underground facilities, and they start rounding up survivors.
Because
the movie's called Night of the Comet.
I'm totally going to watch that. So, because we don't know what's actually happening. We don't know what the sky is. We don't know what's happening above or what's past that simulation. The event that we're seeing could just be the remnants, the results of something that's happening above the simulation.
Right. I'm not in the party of thinking that this is a bad situation. And what I mean by that is that I used to be all about intruder planets, the apocalypse, doomsaying, all that. I used to, but the deeper that I study these materials and the more my intuition, my empathy, and my imagination take off, and I realize this whole experience is more spiritual than physical. And I often fear things by concept, even though I never actually suffer those circumstances. And the more I cogitate and I think about all these discoveries that I've put together and I have made, and I hear from other people, and as we put these pieces together that would on the surface be harrowing, the more I examine all this, I'm like, man, this is a game. Somebody didn't want me to realize that there really isn't any danger here, in that I'm just developing something. Maybe my personality, maybe I'm just an immortal trapped in this husk, and the true oversoul just didn't want me to know that I was actually safe, and that all this is illusory, and that I'm in no real danger, and that all these harrowing deaths that I see other people go through and all that, and in actuality, they exit their avatars before they actually feel any of that. So, I mean, I have personal experience with this. I mean, I had a motorcycle accident that should have killed me instantly. I'm talking, I flew 65 feet through the air off my Harley Davidson, which is 1,000 pounds. I got a fat boy. I got one of the big bikes. And I flew upside down 65 feet, and I had a body impact on a concrete pylon, and rebar went right through my arm and tore my tattoo out. So, yeah, but it was one of the best experiences of my life. And I did a video about it, explaining to my subscribers that I did one YouTube video about the Phoenix. A couple weeks later, I had a motorcycle accident. A year later, I wrapped all my research around simulation theory behind that incident, behind how I felt and saw other people and how awesome it was. I didn't know I was hurt. I had a vague idea that I was hurt. I knew I'd been in an accident. I was lucid. I was very lucid, but I was having conversations with people, but it wasn't their avatars I was concerned with anymore. It was like, man, each individual person I talked to was a wealth of information that I just found astonishing. And I listened to people talk about mundane things as they were waiting for the ambulance to get there. And I had an awesome time, even though I was bleeding out. I was bleeding out, and I woke up in the emergency room. So, but what I'm saying is I love to have these discussions and try to bounce ideas and figure it out. But in truth, I'm so divorced from the idea that there's anything to worry about, even in the apocalypse, even in 2040, 2046. I mean, I will die for my beliefs 100%. I have no problem with that concept at all. Not because I don't fear death, but because I believe I have done such top-notch research and crossed all my T's and dotted all my I's that I can show all this. Because on my channel, I'm not telling people what I believe. I'm showing it to them. They can go read it themselves. They can go put it all. They can get a calculator out and they can do it themselves. So, but in the long run, nothing really matters as far as the fear mongering anymore. It's like, I don't care about the elite. I don't care about what the news is talking about. I don't give it. I mean, no, some of you guys, I mean, you might know my personal story too. I went to prison for some heinous stuff. I was a kidnapper. You know what I mean? I was involved in a terrible assault. Nobody really got hurt, but it was still an assault. So I have people, man, that are hating on me, and they open up their own channels and talk bad about me, but I don't care. There is nothing that's ever going to stop me from moving forward and doing what I believe I'm supposed to be doing right now. I have a lot of data to keep putting out, and I don't give a damn how many detractors I have, because I have a lot of supporters as well. But in the end, I don't believe it's any individual discoveries that we make that define us. They're not. I believe it has everything to do with Campbell and you and I. I believe we're immortal souls, and I believe that for the longest time that the plan worked. And the plan was to make us believe that we really had something to fear so we could develop a really good personality. But it's over. It's over. The cat's out the bag. Timelines are unraveling. The oversoul is no longer concerned with hiding the truth anymore. Now it's almost as if the oversoul is promoting it. People are waking up so damn fast, it's causing problems. So that's where I'm at right now. I love that.
Grand organized design. You know, the only truth really is, or the only truth is love. Like that's like where it's always led me back to. And I call that grand organized design, and everything out of that is the use of our imagination, you know, and that's just us like tweaking and working. And as you said, defining our personalities and developing our own creative expression on the matter. And all it does is chisel us as souls into more beautiful artworks. And that's why I love it so much. Okay, so I loved what you just said there. Beautiful description.
Well, thank you.
Nice.
Appreciate it.
Cam, would you have any questions? 'Cause I've got
No, no,
10,000
if you've got
coming
one,
through, so please
yeah,
pop
you
in
go.
before I
Shoot.
start.
Hey, you may,
Anything?
you may as well shoot because I've already been up with Campbell 3 times now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, so because of the channel, I want to tie in this Skies of Simulation, Tartaria, and where we're at today with Tartaria coming through so strongly into the consciousness as people are waking up to this amazing, truth of who they are and what we are, and our Australian Aboriginals. So those three components, Jason, tie them together in your thoughts.
Tie them together. Okay. Well, as far as Tartaria goes, there is no doubt within my mind that in between the 7th and the 14th century AD, we're talking about like 800 years ago, that there was a vast mariner race going around all over the world doing things, building these forts, and we find evidence of their architecture everywhere. Now, I believe they were in Australia. I believe they were all over New Caledonia. I believe now this is when the world still looked the way it does today, where the sea levels were pretty much on par today. We have this now. Gavin Menzies did a really good job in that book 1421, the year that China discovered the world. He did a very good job showing how we really don't have an accurate assessment today of how well that they navigated the ancient world, because he shows document after document from antiquity that they knew what they were doing. They knew where things were in the world. They were able to travel and do all that. Now, these artifacts that have been found that are called ooparts, out of place artifacts, they're basically from this time period from 700 AD all the way to 14. It's about a 650-year period. This is basically the greater Tartary period. Now, you're saying Tartaria, and I understand that's the modern basically label that's put on the civilization. But Tartary was basically, it comes from the word Tartarus, and it's indicative that at one time in the ancient world, there was a technologically advanced civilization that was in the far west. That's what Tartarus means. Yeah. It means the far west. Only later in history, did it become attached to the idea of hell. It was never attached to the idea of hell initially, because initially Uranus, after they survived the cataclysm, Uranus, Uranus, he gets his sons all together and they cast lots for different areas of the geographical world, because their families were already getting big again, and they couldn't stay in the same land. So Uranus and his sons cast lots, and one of them cast the lot of Tartarus. But he wasn't sent to hell. That only came hundreds of years later when these stories were reinterpreted from different frames of reference. He was banished to the far west. And this is what we find initially in the Near East after the great cataclysm known as the Day the Sky Fell. When the vapor canopy collapsed, they cast lots. The same story is found in the book of Jasher and the Jewish Haggadahs and other rabbinical writings as Noah and his sons casting lots for different areas of the world. Well, one got the north, one got the south, one got to stay right there, one got the east, one got the west. The ones that stayed there were Noah and his progeny. But he had 4 sons. One of them was Arba. Arba was the father of Anak. A lot of people don't realize this. The Bible cuts off with the lineage of Noah and only focuses on the lineage of Noah. But when you read these old other texts, you find out that after the cataclysm, Noah and Naamah had more sons and daughters. They continued, and this caused a problem. This caused a problem in the ancient Near East. The problem was Noah and Naamah were pure blood pre-vapor. They were vapor canopy biology. So after the collapse of the vapor canopy, when they continued to have children, they had children that were of gigantic size, and it became a threat to the people who were born after the collapse of the vapor canopy. Because once the vapor canopy was down, the genome had been changed. Now people are being born to sizes that are closer to us today. But when Noah, who had this awesome pre-flood genetics, he kept having sons and daughters, it caused a problem. One of his daughters was Semiramis. I don't know if you guys know about the history of Semiramis, but she was the queen of Babylon, anciently wicked queen. But she took it as one of her lovers, a half Titan, half giant, somebody who was absolutely born first generation Titan after the collapse of the vapor canopy, but was also fathered by a giant who was already living after the vapor canopy. So he was much bigger. He enters the historical record, in the Hebrew text as Nimrod, but in the ancient world, he was called Amar Udaak. Later he was called Merodach, and then it became Marduk, and then it became Nimrod. It's all the same. It's all the same person. Wow. But he, in Sumerian writings, he was called Bilgamesh, which was mistranslated about 100 years ago to Gilgamesh. It's called the Epic of Gilgamesh. But the true name is Bilgamesh. It's all the same person. Bilgamesh is just who he was in the first part of his life before he became the king of Akkad. But all Tartaria was a civilization that was west of the Near East, and it became very advanced. It was it was feared, and they left it alone, and it actually enjoyed a period of isolation where it could develop no wars, no nothing, because the rest of the world feared it and they had stayed away. It was only about 1,000 years after the collapse of the vapor canopy that kingdoms and empires began spreading, human population, that now they started spreading into Central Asia and Europe, and they come across this civilization that looked like it had been there for a very long time. It was basically the Tartars, the Tartars, the Magyars, the ancestors of the Huns, Central Europe's, the ancestors of the Slavs. It's basically the Central European stock.
Does that go back?
Yes, the Frisians definitely. Yeah, well, the Frisians tell the tale. The Oralind manuscript is fantastic. I have a copy of Oralind back here. But yeah, the Oralind, they even date the collapse of the vapor canopy very, very close to the actual date. The great cataclysm that caused that. The Oralind manuscript even describes calendars before the flood. It tells the truth. It says in the days before the flood, men did not count the years; they counted days. That's in the Oralind. There's a lot of oral texts that tell the truth about all that.
So, as far as that civilization spreading to Australia, because obviously we've looked at like Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane and our capital cities, and it follows all the same architectural it's structures and processes, and it's basically all the same. But our Indigenous Australians, the ones that we've spoken to, have absolutely no record or knowledge of these cities existing at the same time as they did. So it's been a phenomenon talking to them.
Well, I'm gonna have to introduce a concept now.
Good.
That we've avoided in this video so far.
Excellent.
All right. Okay, we like to talk about our reality in a linear fashion.
It's true. Yes.
But I have explained on my own channel, and I've given many examples that history may be a series of simulations that were all fun, and different ones were stopped when whatever protocol was made for whatever experiment was being run by the overseers. They stopped different historical timelines. When they wipe the slate in the simulacrum, they don't always remove the evidence, because this you have to understand. It's any sophisticated system is always going to leave some type of trace elements for its activities. And computers are the same way. I can take a thumb drive, and I can have a lot on this thumb drive, and then I can delete everything on this thumb drive on my computer. But a CIA analyst gets a hold of this thumb drive. He's got access to sophisticated equipment that can find basically ghost data that's in here, basically find out what was on this. He may not be able to get it all off, but he can get it. Well, the simulation would be the same thing. a vast civilization in Australia. It's thriving for 350 years. They're building cities, infrastructure. And then all of a sudden the overseers decide, well, we don't need that. We need to make sure this place stays empty. Well, this is going to get out of control. Here in a while, there's going to be 5 million people here. We need to put a stop to this. It's just like one of those old toys we had where we could draw pictures on there and we slide it and everything vanishes. We can draw a new picture. But there's gonna be some ooparts. There's going to be fossils in the simulacrum itself, because if we're in a simulation that's the result of layers of simulation, then there's going to be cross-pollination between these different realities. Reality tunnels converge all the time, and they borrow and they exchange information. It can't always all be deleted without affecting other areas. So if you look at it from a computer analyst perspective, you're looking at the ability to stop an entire series of protocols, erase most of it, but you can't erase it all or you'll damage other things that are ongoing.
Yeah.
So you take out what you can. So 500 years later, a whole new culture moves into the area and they see it. A plow overturns a dressed cut block. And outside the city of Melbourne, all of a sudden, a whole pavement is undone and they know no one's been here in recorded history. And then we find these old trace civilizations pieces. We got to find all this in Australia, but you also find them in other places of the world that are inexplicable, for which there are no histories. Australia is not an anomaly. These are found worldwide. These evidence that a whole series of histories was played out in this area for which we don't have a trace of information from, other than the fact we can dig up like Göbekli Tepe. Okay, we can dig up Göbekli Tepe and not find a single human skeleton, and then find out that it was buried completely in mud. And in order to justify it to the public that this is a legitimate archaeological site, the scientists actually published that the people buried their city to preserve it before they left. And the very act of getting enough dirt to bury Göbekli Tepe would have required more man hours to build Göbekli Tepe itself. And it's not the only site that they say this on. There are many ancient civilizations that have been found completely entombed in dirt, but we don't find skeletons. We don't find the people. So what I'm saying is if we're going to entertain simulation theory, then we need to be able to wrap our minds around the fact that if this is a simulation, then it's governed by protocols that someone else controls. And if there's somebody else controlling these, they're running experiments. And if they're running experiments, that means they have the ability to stop and start different programs. And if they have the ability to stop and start different programs, that means they can do that without leaving enough trace elements for us to discover, unless we're deliberately searching for them.
So Jace, like I think I love that. Campbell and I've definitely been like working with that as a model, that there's been a simulated or a simultaneous timeline coexisting, perceiving by different people in different ways. But like when we talk about something like Melbourne or Sydney, but let's just focus on Melbourne because that's been a big focus of ours. Like it appears to us that basically the vast majority of Melbourne City was already there. Like it's not relics that were uncovered under the mud. Like it was like the vast majority of the city as it currently stands was already coexisting, and we found it that way. Like basically almost completely undug, like in almost the exact same way it is today. Like, so that's sort of like the energetic that we've been looking at. So like that would denote potentially that our Indigenous were coexisting in a different simulation and so they weren't even seeing it, but that it is actually was completely almost in its entirety present as it is today. Like, I mean, that's taking it very far, that's these aren't remnants. These were whole
Well, we look at timelines as
that's definitely an anomaly.
Like when we think of timelines, we think that they all keep continuing. But Jason's saying maybe they get cut, like the Toltecs, right? They all disappeared. Where they go? So
I totally think they get edited.
This is the thing. So
yeah.
maybe they hit a point and they get cut, and that's why we've got all these parts and unexplained phenomena and things, because literally they've cut that simulation and they've put another people into the same
well, I mean, we actually do have archaeological geologic evidence of simulations being stopped. Now, we have interpreted it totally differently, but I can give you a bunch of examples right now. So we cannot scientifically explain, although we gloss over it very well in our books, but we cannot scientifically explain how you fossilize a jellyfish. Why are there earthworms found completely petrified?
Yeah.
What happened to make the hairs on different ancient creatures stand out before they were turned to stone? We have so many. We're talking about mollusks that are found 700 feet below sea level, solid stone, even the tissue. So what happened that flash froze the entire ancient world? We have actual fossils of fish that were turned to rock in the very instant they were in the middle of giving birth to other fish. So we also we have sharks that are in the middle of biting. These are found fossilized. It's nothing theoretical. Anybody can go to my channel and look at my 2 videos on anomalous fossil finds and all that. I have over 100 pictures of fossils that have been found displayed all over the world of things that are absolutely inexplicable. There's no way to turn these things into stone. I've got pictures of octopus suction cups and stuff turned to absolute petrified stone. You can't turn a jellyfish to stone. It's impossible. The petrification process is defined in the uniformitarian theory of natural selection as when a creature is killed and buried and then compressed, there's heat. It's also water. So they try to describe this flood and all that, and they try to get you to think that, okay, maybe the Great Flood did all this and all that, but it still does not account for the beautiful little tentacles in cilia, all the fine micro details of a jellyfish. A jellyfish doesn't have any bones. How did you turn it to stone? So this is another one of my theories, that when a systemic shutdown occurs, it's a flash freeze. Everything is flash frozen. That's why we have mammoths that have tulips undigested.
Like the pause button, just like a pause button. Boom.
Yes. Like the pause button.
Yeah. Yep. Makes sense.
Just like that. Just like that. And it's happened. I mean, it's happened. We see the evidence of it everywhere. It has happened. So I'm often saying this on my channel. If we can show that any one thing has happened, then it's happened all the time or everywhere. There are no anomalies. If we can show that one thing is true somewhere, then it's true everywhere. That's just the way you have to define reality that way.
I know,
because
love that
if you don't, you're just cherry picking.
And I'm a graphic designer, so I mean I work in Photoshop and InDesign and Illustrator all the time, and it's really easy for me to pause something here, have it frozen in time, implement it, put it into this picture here, add moving images here, and bring together 5 different techniques and mediums and create a brand new image. A completely new story. I can fully see from that analogy how you could freeze the cities of the cities that we know as Melbourne and Sydney, have them frozen in time, have another experience playing out in video time, being our Indigenous and the culture going on there, and having this frozen, and then having another medium coming in, maybe the 250 years ago, the explorers, and them all interacting in basically one image stream coming in from, I can so see that. And from a simulation as a graphic designer, that totally fucking works, man. That's totally easy and functioning. Yeah.
That's good.
So we don't need to a lot of our discussions are obviously just using our imagination, Jace. We're just getting into it from that perspective. But we can totally work with the idea that when we say Tartaria consciousness, we're not talking so much about the Tartars. We're talking now about this this burgeoning new understanding that's been sort of like termed Tartaria.
Right.
But, you know, people were waking up to the fact that, you know, history is absolutely not what they've been told.
Right.
So, you know, like I can see, Campbell, like Melbourne, Sydney, because Australia obviously is this amazing container because we've got this tiny time frame. You know, our history donates it as like this tiny 250 window where we should have only had these sort of, you know, architectural feats happening in the last 200 years, whatever. So it gives us a good, I don't know, page to work on. It's like a page in Photoshop. But, you know, we've got this like really fully developed cities. And like we have evidence that so much now. They are fully developed, beautiful, standing, solid cities. And we've just walked right into them. And then at the same time, we have interviewed several elders now who hold very, very, you know, ancient knowledge of their timelines, and they do not cross at all. Like nothing. There's nothing going on there.
How about this?
At the same time.
So how about this? I have mentioned a few times on my own channel, but if these cities are as you say, and they were found that way, then we're dealing with a phenomenon that has also been documented in the 1800s in the United States.
Yes.
So if we have actual cities that for which we don't have any records that they were built, but we know they just appeared in the historical record and then later they're occupied by us. Now, this denotes to me that what happened was very similar to what happened in 1902. Because I've documented so much in 1902 how on the world scene out of nowhere exploded all the companies that are now Fortune 500 companies today. They had their birth in 1902. Now, and this is what I documented. Now, for these companies not to exist in 1900 and most of them not in 1901, but to explode on the scene in 1902 and a few more in 1903, and for what you're saying about these cities, then this would be direct evidence of a reset for which we have nothing in the historical record. No books mention them, no nothing. And that's what happened in 1902. 1902 didn't have anything at the time except for volcanoes that were killing a lot of people. Like at Martinique, a volcano incinerated 30,000 people. And one guy survived named Auguste. He survived because he was in a pit. He was supposed to die as a convicted criminal. And he never died. He lived, and then he traveled with the Barnum and Bailey circus, man. And he was on display because he's the only person that survived Mount Pelee explosion on Martinique in 1902, and it was a big deal. But 1902 was very interesting, but it was a reset because we don't really know what happened from 1890 to 1901. We just have evidence of it, and I did a whole video recently about that. That when these resets happen, we find this architecture and we find these things in geopolitics that don't make any sense because they had no development. They just appeared on the world scene. So we have the evidence of a reset, but it's like, here's all these children that just appeared. We don't know where their parents are. But at the time, it seemed normal to put these kids in factories and to raise them in these different orphanages. It seemed normal at the time, but 30 years later, people are writing books like, what the hell happened 30 years ago for all this? It's always in retrospect that we see the evidence of resets. We never see it as they're playing out.
I mean, the World Trade Fairs, they were fantastic. Like they sort of like all appeared around 1890, and they're wheeling out all of the products, the things, the times, the events. It's like the school of what you're about to, here's what you're going to use in this culture. Here's all the things. I can see how the companies would have been introduced at that point from those World Trade Fair offerings. And also, that was also the birth of science fucking fiction, man. Science fiction is phenomenal back then. It's so right at the reset, there was the birth of science fiction, and obviously the introduction of the World Trade Fairs. So all of that is just such a lovely presentation of fact and fiction.
Let me tell you how my mind works. So I take this into consideration of this picture you just painted me. All right, I assimilate that data with what I know about 1902 and how everything I've documented about that. So in my mind, I'm an investigator. Now there's no phenomena that will unfold in our world that is not in some way causal. There's a reason why. It can't just happen. There's got to be a reason. So what the picture that was just forming in my mind when we were talking about this is that, okay, Europeans were moving too fast and they built some cities in Australia and maybe New Zealand. Europeans were moving faster than the timeline could account for. The overseers were not happy about the development. Now, on my own channel, one of my main quotes that I'm always saying is that it only takes us 200 years to go from horse and buggy to Hadron Collider. I say that a lot because I need to paint the picture in people's minds how incredibly dynamic humans are. From horse and buggy to Hadron Collider only takes 2 centuries. Therefore, the picture that's painted in my mind is, were we reset in the 1800s because in the 16 and 1700s we grew too fast?
That would make sense to me. Yeah, I mean, that would make sense to what we're talking about today. 100%.
I mean, when you look at the tech, everything, the clothes, the music, the
steampunk,
art,
steampunk,
everything in the late
yes,
1700s.
steampunk is a very good steampunk is a very good example.
Yep.
You're right.
Yeah, and then by the 1800s, it's all black and white, isn't it? Black suits, everything's not, all the art's gone from everything.
Yeah.
It's very, like reset looking.
Yeah, empty, like it's ready to be filled in, and enter the World Trade Fairs, enter science fiction. Here's your difference between fact and fiction. Here's how your perception of reality, where everything fits. Here's all the things you're going to use. Here are the cultures you're interacting with. All right, go forward, starting again. It does feel like that.
It does.
So essentially what you're suggesting, Jace, is that there's like you call them the overlords or the overseers, like that there is actually a time, what would be the word? Like they've got a notion of the natural way they want us to move forward, a natural evolutionary timeline that in some way, for some reason, is serving either us or them, or it is, I mean, those overlords, you're not putting that down to grand organized design. You're actually saying this is an entity unto itself, something past what we would know as God.
my own belief system is that there is an oversoul, but he or she doesn't have much to do with what's going on here. Now, I believe we live in a contained world, and that necessarily implies there must be a much bigger outside world for this just to be a containment. So that being the case, on the outside of this field, then we have overseers, just like the oldest writings say that God made mankind in his image. Well, that tells me that humans made humans to live in the simulacrum, that there's no mystery here. The real mystery is the oversoul that is cool with all this, the oversoul that is allowing for these simulations to be conducted and run for whatever reason. Be they run simulations that are run because we're trying to scientifically find out a series of understand problems on the outside of the construct, or if the problems are fictions that were introduced into the narrative of the simulacrum to make us further believe that we are in danger when we're not, because the belief that we are in danger is what would develop the personality. If immortals truly found out they were in a simulation in the collective, then it would all be for naught, because the output would be affected. And as long as it's only a minority who know the truth and the majority are still playing ball, then the simulacrum will work just fine in producing whatever scientific output needs to be produced for those on the outside. But evidently we're in a construct that has a timed release, and we were moving too fast. This is the threat that's found in the Tower of Babel story, because the Tower of Babel story is not what we've been told. It's actually a failed threat against humanity, because it says specifically that overseers, calls them gods, they talked among themselves, not to humans, and they said, look, the man has become as one of us. There is nothing impossible for them. Their imaginations are taken off. We need to do something. So what do? They created division and strife, and they destroyed the architectural project that we were working on, because we had realized that we were in a containment field and we wanted to get out. That's what we did.
Yeah, I agree with that story. Yes. Okay, well, that opens up a whole other level of conversation. Because if what we're suggesting is possible, then we're on the verge, therefore, of another reset.
Yes,
because
yeah,
enough
2040.
I mean, many people are becoming conscious of this, which is would be not in alignment with the time release in us moving forward here. I mean, where do we go from? Like, are you theorizing that we are on the verge of another time reset? And are you
well, I'm pretty vocal about my beliefs. We're heading toward a utopia. It's an artificial one, but it's still going to be good times for a lot of people nonetheless. The utopia is what we're moving into, but it's going to be abruptly stopped by the very reset you're talking about. It's I have over 42 videos that talk about this 2040 reset, the month of May, and all the historical times that this exact same reset happened. And yeah, we're heading toward a new utopia. And it's going to actually occupy the minds of a lot of people. It's designed for a distraction. I've been telling people for 2 years on my channel, I've been doing predictions videos using date sequence prediction and isometric projections. I've been showing people that all this narrative, all this doomsaying, all this negativity that's been going on since 2019, 2020, and 2021, 2022 is over in 2023. You're going to see a whole series of events are about to unfold. It's going to change a lot of things. A lot of nations are going to start internalizing this whole 2030 agenda deal is going to be exposed for what it is, which was fear mongering. It's not true. We're going to be heading into a utopia, but it's not going to last but about 15 years. And then 2040 happens, and it's a whole nother series of events. But resets aren't something that just happen. They're scheduled. Yeah. This is what the point of my channel is. I show the scheduling. I show exactly not only when it happened in throughout history, but I show and I reveal those who knew it was going to happen and predicted it with accuracy.
So if it's scheduled and it's inevitably going to happen, is everyone affected no matter what? Or is there a different impact versus on the consciousness of the individual?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna be the first one to be honest with you about that. I have not worked out all those details. I don't. I just know the exact chronology. Now, I see a lot of evidence that the elite fear it because they're always hiding. They're always hiding, and that's the subject matter of many of my videos. The elite has the elite. They must serve another master. Because this is what the purpose of the Phoenix was in the most ancient records. We have Gnostic, the trimorphic Tenoi, and on the origin of the world. These are ancient Gnostic documents from the Nag Hammadi library in Egypt, and they're very specific about the purpose of the Phoenix. The Phoenix was to keep the Archons in check. Well, the elite follow the Archons. The Archons are what give them their power to control over the minds and the masses of the people. But the Phoenix was always designed to keep them in check. Archons are lords of time. They manipulate our perception of time. They manipulate histories and all that. But the Phoenix appears no matter what the calendar is, no matter who changes the calendar. It doesn't matter if it's Julian, if it's Islamic Hijra, if it's Gregorian old style, or if it's Gregorian new style. It does not matter. Phoenix appears every 138 years, and last in 1902, we know for a fact the elite predicted. They knew about it because they hid. But as soon as they realized that this wasn't the big one, 1902, they were relatively safe, and they had another 138 years. As soon as they realized that, you can see from the historical record what happened. They unleashed their wealth. Hundreds of companies were born in a year.
Yeah.
So, because we get the idea that we get this far and we worked it out and we understand, relatively speaking, pretty well. And, it's going to keep going if we're heading towards 2040. 10, 20 more years worth of understanding. It seems a bit like, a bit of a drag to think that we would get to that level of consciousness and then just reset back into it.
Okay. Yeah, I get you. I do 100%. I understand where you're coming from, but you're very unfamiliar with a lot of my findings as well.
I am. It's true, Jace.
Because listen, an awareness of any phenomena gives you power over that phenomena. All right.
Yes.
The awareness of power produces a power.
Yes.
Just We live in a reflective medium. It's just like if you believe opposition exists, then opposition will appear. So the same thing happens for the Phoenix phenomenon. Those who are aware of it and don't fear it are not on that frequency. Phoenix comes and goes. There are communities that survive all the time. I just did a video about a major cataclysm that happened in the old world. It's very well known. It is the destruction of the Mohenjo-Daro civilization, the Harappan civilization, which happened at the exact same time as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which happened the same time as Admon and Zeboam, and the Sumerian cities were all laid waste. It's in the lamentation text of the the Near East. But what's very interesting, the path of destruction is well known. However, there was one community called Zela that totally survived. This is what resets are like. A community of like-minded individuals can basically create their own reality. It's their own reality bubble, and they're insulated from whatever's going on in the collective. On a personal level, that's also the message of my Archaix channel. I'm always explaining, even when I'm doomsaying, I'm always explaining to people that there are two different realities that are coexisting right now.
Yeah.
One of them is for the collective, and you're more than welcome to join it. As a matter of fact, Artificial Intelligence X is always trying to induce you to join it and to modify your behavior to conform to the collective, because it's less power expenditure on its behalf. But there's another reality going on at all times. It's because you are a singularity, meaning you're an immortal soul trapped in a husk. That means you create your own reality tunnel, and you are perfectly insulated from the entire collective if you choose to be. But as soon as you focus on anything in your environment and you fear it, you borrow its fate. Whatever it's going to go through, you're going to go through too. This is the story of Lot's wife when she turned around for a split second to see what was happening to her friends in the city of Sodom when it was being destroyed from the sky. She turned around and vaporized with them. That's it. I don't know if the story's true or not, but the message is real.
Yeah, the analogy, yeah, for sure. Wow, nice. All right. All right, we've been going for 2.5 hours, guys.
No. Wait, Campbell. You can't stop it. Yeah, I just have one. I just got to go for one more second. So, like, okay, and I agree with what you just said, Jason. Totally. And it's a really interesting concept, because, like, what that would mean is that there's going to be a body of consciousness consciously living alongside a reset and conscious of it.
Hold on, stop.
Like
I need to stop you right there.
Yes, go.
I'm going to quote a prophecy right now that says exactly what you just said.
Okay, cool.
All right. 2 women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and the other left. 2 men will be working in the field. One will be taken and the other left. Yes, listen. The Phoenix phenomenon and any other phenomenon that we experience is always discretionary. This is why we are basically masters of our own fate. This is why ABC, NBC, CBS, BBC, all the major news networks are steadily feeding you fear porn. Because if they can get you to vibrate on the wrong frequency, you're a part of the collective. Because for some reason, the elite do not like individuality. Now, on the same token, I am becoming more and more convinced over these past few weeks that the elite may not like individuality, but we must have a benefactor that opposes them, because there are many of us putting material out and we have not been silenced.
Yep.
That's a good point. Yeah. I was just going to say, so
like, and then, sorry, yes.
Do you think a Phoenix event, a reset event, is that when they're cutting and pasting timelines? Is that sort of like, these 2 different, obviously this is going to be an opinion. Does the collective kind of get wiped out, and those who are thinking from themselves get to sort of go forward on the new timeline? Okay. Is that kind of thing?
Yes. There's okay. It's very difficult to answer this and know that you're understanding exactly what I'm saying. Okay. Listen, every 138 years, it's not just red dust, red man.
Yeah.
It's not just volcanoes. It's not earthquakes, tsunamis. It's not just some weird diseases that suddenly appear. It's mass abductions. I say abductions, but it's actually mass vanishings. Just like the Children's Crusade,
Yeah.
so many children just vanished in 1212, which is a Phoenix year. But the people of the time were so mystified about the vanishing of so many children. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of children in Europe just up and disappeared. Now, this is in 1212 AD. Now, it was during the Crusades, so the authorities at the time said, okay, look, we'll just tell the people it was the Children's Crusade. All the kids came together because evidently only the children of God could defeat the Muslims. But it wasn't true. It was propaganda. It was a story that was invented to explain something that the church couldn't explain. The total absolute vanishing of hundreds of thousands of kids. So 1902, we have so many weird edits. We have so many things that just unusual that happen. It's not just natural phenomena. It's exactly what you're saying. These 138-year periods, this is when systems are put back into their corresponding reality tunnels. Anything that's out of whack or anything that's not going the way that the elite want them to go, this is when everything's put back. Look, for over 200 years, a certain culture of people were making war against Europeans. They were making war through finances, through banks that were funding both sides of the war between the states. They were doing all these things. Now, they just couldn't get a real good stronghold in the West. They were always opposed, and it was really ticking them off. In 1902, all of a sudden, they got put on their course. They got empowered. 17 years later, they exterminated 23 million white Christian Russians, and they created the Soviet Empire and turned an entire nation descended from Tartary into atheists, and then turned around and used that nation for the Cold War to instill fear in all the other nations of the world for the whole nuclear scare and the space race and all that, all the way up until 1991 when those people finally broke free from the Bolsheviks.
Wow.
It's some deep history, but this video's gone way too long for us to go in that direction.
You, Kelly, would have a few
Sorry, my fault.
But, I mean, we can always do this again in the future. But Kelly, you want to talk?
No, I agree. No. We should call it a day. But I've loved it. The looking at how the timeline edits, how the cultures come up against each other, and then how when one's conscious of it coming and conscious of the expression of it, and then it actually happening again, being conscious of it, like that's a whole another discussion, which I just find absolutely fascinating. I find it very easy to conceptualize this as a graphic designer and working with all the medium inputs that you can potentially put into actually building a physical timeline in like InDesign or whatever. And it's really quite easy to imagine it from that perspective. And when you look at it as a simulation and then, use what we use as a simulation, the computer, and then use the programs on the computer, it's all very easy to understand. Yeah. So what I'm very fascinated in now is moving forward, as we hold this information and continue to really process it and understand it, what that looks like as we move through our actual reset. Like that is a phenomenal sort of body of questioning and looking. That's a good quest in that concept. So I would really love to have another show starting from there, from that.
Well, I mean, throughout the course of history and all the things we suffered in the past through different life sims, I believe we've been victims all this time.
Yes.
But the awakening that's occurring now in the next 15, 16 years, I think this next one is going to be fundamentally different, because even it's also attached to a concept for which it's never been attached to in the past, and that is apocalypse. Now, the media is going to get you to think the apocalypse is a very negative thing, but it actually means to unveil the truth.
Yes.
So yeah, before, I don't want to talk anymore before we just go off and talk about
I know another question when we go on for another hour.
Yeah.
I know. Cool. Well, I mean, fucking hell, man, that was awesome to meet you, Jace. Fantastic. That was really, really, really fun.
Yeah, we'll do this again. No doubt.
Yes. Yeah.
Definitely.
Thanks for your time. Of course, you two have got an event coming up. So, well, not together, but one there and one streamed in. So enjoy that event. And thanks for everyone watching. And we will definitely be in touch, Jace, because we would definitely like to continue this conversation down the line. So thank you for your time.
Awesome. Total honor, my friend. Thank you so much for your brilliant brain and mind and your position here on the planet. And being here to discuss this with us is just fantastic. You're breath of fucking fresh air, man. So thank you so much
I
for
appreciate it.
linking your
appreciate you,
consciousness with
mate.
ours. It was really, really fun.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And thanks for your time.
Hey, I will. I'll put this on my channel too. Oh, after I record it off of yours, I'll
Yep.
just need your links. Whatever links you guys want me to put, because
Yep.
like I said, I got a pretty active channel, and I
Yep.
I think there's a lot of people that are on my channel that are not subscribed to you. So we
Cool. Definitely. Yep.
need
Yep.
to send them over there.
It'll be going up next Thursday, so I can send you over the copy as well if you want, and any links. And yeah,
Okay.
that'd be awesome.
Awesome.
Okay.
Fantastic, Jace. Well, look, you have the
Awesome.
best rest
Thank
of
you
your
very
night or
much.
day, wherever you are in the
All right.
timeline.
And we'll be in touch. All right. Cheers, mate.
All right,
Bye.
guys. Have a lovely day.
You
See you
too.
later.
Thanks all. See ya. Bye.
Later.